Hello, and welcome to this first virtual St. Pius Lunch and Learn activity. I hope you are having a good lunch. I hope you will get something out of the next half hour or so of conversation. I'm here to talk to you today about my experience with the St. Pius Faith Formation Program. I was blessed with about 15 years of activity working with young people in the organization. I'd like to tell you about my story, how I got started, some of the things that happened, and some of the things that I learned. I'll start by saying I'm a lifelong Catholic, grew up, memorized, went to CCD, moved away from home, sort of moved away from church activities. Like many young people, took a break. Got married in a church here in Des Moines, ultimately had children. Children were baptized in a different church than the one we got married in. Went from church to church, couldn't quite find something that felt like home. And ultimately we ended up here at St. Pius. 2 young children, one of them moving into first grade. The registration came out for what was then called Parish Religious Education Program, or PrEP. We, of course, being good parents, good Catholic parents, signed our children up, or signed our first grader up for that class. There was a spot on the form where you could volunteer if you wanted to be a hall monitor, work in the office, or potentially lead a class. I wrote down something like, if you can't find anybody else, I would maybe be interested in learning some more about this. You could just hear the commitment coming out of that sign-up. We turned in the form. Months went by, because you turn in the form in the spring and classes start in the fall. Somehow that got translated to my spouse calling me at work one day and saying, "Mary Heinrich just called. You have a class of 10 kids. She'll drop off your instructor material shortly." I'm not exactly sure how, if you can't find anybody else, I'd be interested in hearing more about it, turned into, I'm now teaching. I'm volunteering. I'm leading a group of 10 kids on a Wednesday night. To give you some background on me, I'm the youngest child of 2 youngest children. I've never interacted with groups of young people. I am not a holy scriptural person. And now I'm going to be leading groups of young people in what I would call a holy church setting. I don't think I can do this. Well, there's training provided. That brought me some comfort. I looked at the materials that Mary had dropped off for my 10-kid class, and I signed up for training. I remember walking into that training room. There were about 60 people. 55 of them were female. Of the other males in the group, 2 of them were simply there to assist their spouse. Of the other males in the group, I was the only one under the age of 60. I wasn't feeling terribly warm in my demographic, and then the question came, how many of you have never done this before? In the room, 5 hands went up. 2 of them were mine. I felt very apprehensive about this. I was hesitant, but I was not quite reluctant. Well, we went through training, and the first night of class arrived. I walked into the room, and it wasn't 10 kids, it was 12 kids. I, of course, arrived early. I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't find my books. I couldn't find my supplies. I didn't know what to do, so I went down to the office. And I think it was Jody Halligan who said to me, "You're looking for your books and your supplies? They're in that cupboard that are labeled Wednesday night books and supplies." Of course, I go back to my room. I find the Wednesday night books and supplies. I'm set to go. And then the kids start arriving, which includes my own child. It includes several other young people I know. It includes a young man who walks in with a name tag on, tells me that he's wearing a name tag, so I will know his name, and then proceeds to tell me that I probably won't teach him anything that he doesn't already know. At the moment, I mentally agreed with him. That's probably true. So we made it through our first class. We got to know each other a little bit on Wednesday night, and we came back for the following Wednesday night. We went through a few more classes. Things got a little bit easier. I will move on from there and say that the year was a very good experience. And when it came time to sign up for next year, of course I signed up. The kids moved on to second grade, and so did I. First communion, first reconciliation, let's do it. I moved on from second grade to another year of second grade, and another year of second grade. I dropped back down to first grade when our youngest son moved into first grade. I went up to second grade, and I stayed at second grade for up to 15 years that I described earlier. And here's some things that I have learned. I'm not here to just tell you about my story. I'm here to tell you about some of the things I learned working with those young people. Number one, you always have to be prepared to take a detour. I have books, I have lesson plans, I know what's going to go on. And I remember the first year of teaching first grade. 10 of the kids in my class all went to the same elementary school. One weekend, I believe it was in January, the principal of that elementary school, someone that the kids looked up to and adored, died in an automobile accident. That Wednesday night, the kids came in. There were 10 kids. 2 were not there. By coincidence, it happened to be the 10 that all went to the same elementary school. And I started into my lesson plan, and a young man named Matt raised his hand and said, "Can I ask a question?" And his question, if I may paraphrase it here, was, why do bad things happen to good people? If there's a God, why does that happen? And I knew at that moment that my lesson plan for the evening was going to be changed. So we all sat down on the floor and we talked through why those things happen. Maybe we don't know the answer why those things happen. We have to accept some things. We have to deal with some things. We don't always know. And I learned at that moment a very valuable lesson. Always be prepared. Be prepared to talk openly. Be prepared to talk honestly. And young people have a tremendous capacity to understand. I had a similar experience a few years later. There was a young lady who came into class. This was now second grade, moving up, working on that reconciliation, working on that first communion. A young lady came in and she was despondent. Her dog had died. So I know I'm here to tell you about stories and we're already talking about 2 deaths, but her dog had died and she was despondent because someone, I don't know who it was, neighbor, friend, well-meaning relative, had told her that pets do not have souls. And thus, she didn't think she would ever see her dog again. And she asked me, again, for the second time, I am put in a spot that I don't know these answers. I am not that scriptural, holy person. I don't think quickly on my feet. But at that moment, I channeled some of the words that my own father had told me, and I asked her, "Was your dog always happy to see you?" And she said yes. I said, "Would he come running up and greet you at the end of every day when you got home?" And she said yes. And I said, "Do you think your dog just loved your family unconditionally, no matter what happened?" And she said yes. And I said, I don't know what the definition of a soul is, but unconditional love is quite a bit of that soul. You know that your dog is always going to be with you. And there was a happy moment. Was it true? I don't know. Did it bring some peace to that moment in time? Yes, it did. And so, my friends, always be prepared to talk openly, to talk honestly. And young people are always going to be able to listen. A second thing I learned is take advantage of the skills that you have. In a Wednesday night prep class, you walk down the hallway, you will see dozens of instructors doing crafts. I don't really do crafts, unless you count maybe taking some cotton balls and gluing them on a piece of paper and calling it a sheep. I tried some crafts. We had messes. We had glue, we had sticks, we had paper shredded, we had a lot of cleanup to do. But one thing I discovered is I could do plays. I could do plays in our room. If we had a story to act out, the Good Samaritan as an example, we acted it out. We assigned everybody a role, and ultimately everybody, of course, wanted to be the Good Samaritan. We did dozens of plays in our class to tell a story, to make a point, to have some fun. And then when we were done, we would, of course, talk about, here's the Good Samaritan story. Now, how many of you are going to be riding a camel through the desert? We'll talk about camels a little bit later. How many of you are going to be riding a camel through the desert and get assaulted and beat up and robbed? Nobody. Tell me what happens in your life that is like that. Tell me when you've seen someone that needs some help, not lying in the desert needing medical aid, but when have you seen someone that needs some help? And what did you do? How did you help? Maybe how were you helped? And it always ended our day with a beautiful lesson. And so that's the second thing I learned. You're not a crafty person. Take advantage of what works for you. Some of those plays are beautiful experiences. We only had one injury in, I'll say, 12 years. And that's good, because sometimes the Good Samaritan gets a little rough. We also adapted a lot of our plays. I know that when we talk about scripture and stories, sometimes things are very, very structured. It has to be this way. I mentioned camels earlier. In our play of the nativity scene, there were a lot of camels. Joseph and Mary rode camels. Some of our students use the phrase, giddy up, camel. I don't know if they rode camels. I don't know if camels giddy up. But in our play, they did. And the third thing I learned is genuinely how caring and how compassionate young people are. I think that many adults could take a very strong lesson from a group of second graders that I know. I can't tell you how many times I saw one second grader or occasionally a first grader come in having a tough day. They described something, and what happened? Every one of their friends, every one of their classmates offered them some help. That's an attribute that I hope they carried into their adult life. I remember one time when it affected me personally. Again, I was teaching second grade. My own father was going through the end of his life, and ultimately he passed away. I was there when that happened. I stayed with my mom for a few days. We got through the funeral. The funeral was on a Tuesday. It was shortly before Christmas, and I drove back to the Urbandale area on Wednesday. It was our last class prior to Christmas. And at that time, my spouse was helping me with Wednesday night classes. She had made some Christmas treats. I wanted to take those in. So there was another volunteer, someone from the office or one of the hall monitors, who had gotten the kids together that Wednesday night. I was coming in to give those treats away. I walked in, and honestly, this is a tough story to tell. I walked in, and every one of those second graders came running up to give me a giant hug and to tell me that things were going to be okay. That is a moment that I will never forget. Always appreciate the compassion and the caring of children, and hope that the adult world also reaches that state. And the next thing I learned was this. There's an adage in the instructional world of academia that says, if you really want to learn something, try to teach it. For me, again, a lifelong Catholic, who memorized things growing up. Memorizing but not necessarily knowing what it meant. I still got my check mark because I could recite the 10 Commandments. I had no idea what covet meant, but I memorized it. As a lifelong Catholic, the opportunity to work with these young people, to learn the lessons, to act out the play, to answer the questions, brought me the gift, in many cases, of understanding that stuff that I memorized and probably forgot has a reason behind it. I learned that some of the stories connect to one another. I learned that there are no absolutes. I learned that you can get guidance from following a simple story, a simple scripture story, a parable. I learned about those parables. I learned what they meant. I learned what they meant not only in a biblical world, but in today's world. And for me, that was a gift. And this may be one of my favorite learnings from my faith formation activities. The last 2 years that I taught second grade, both of those years had classes that were, again, 10 young people. The unique thing about this is the last 2 years, those 10 young people were 10 young ladies. In both years, they all went to the same school, lived pretty close to one another, played on the same soccer teams. They all knew each other, which meant Wednesday night would start up and there would just be chatter, 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 chatter. I could have all the lesson plans in the world laid out. We could be ready to go through something in a structured way, and then the question would come, and then the question would come, and then the chatter would come. And we would work through it, and we would learn some things together. I genuinely believe that that experience helped me to grow as an individual. It taught me the value of some patience. I often think of that story when I am in an adult meeting where patience is required. There's very little that will shake me up. If you can work through a group of 10 chatty second graders, you can certainly deal with anything else in a conversation. I remember one night we were working by the classroom door, which was open, and for some reason I needed to quickly step out into the hall. And I noticed the office volunteers were lined up in the hallway. I asked, "Is something going on?" And their answer was, "No, we just enjoyed listening to you respond to all of these questions." My friends, find some joy where you can take it. And while I could talk about many other things that I've learned and the blessing that this faith formation and youth volunteer experience brought me, I'll close with one more story. And I know the stories to date have talked a little bit more about non-faith-based, non-action items, things that I've learned, things that have helped me to grow. I'll end with this one. And because, of course, this is a Catholic talk, I have to include a rosary. In the later years of the classes, we would end every class with a prayer. But it wasn't just a prayer. I got in the habit of bringing a rosary with me. Oftentimes a rosary that came from a family member. This one happens to be one from my mother. And we would sit in a circle on the floor. The children, me, and another instructor or assistant if we had one. And we would put the rosary out, and I would ask every child to simply take their thumb and forefinger and hold on to one bead. Now I know this is probably not the pure way to pray the rosary, but I would ask those young people at that time to think. Think of someone that they knew. Could be a family member, could be a friend, could be somebody in the neighborhood. Think of someone that they knew that needed some help. Think of that person, hold that bead, and let's say a silent prayer. Let's say a silent prayer for everyone that is in need, that has their bead being held. And at the end of that silent prayer, because one of the things that we definitely learned in second grade was how to apply what you've learned, I asked those second graders to go out into the world, and that person that needs help, try to do something for them. Prayer is a beautiful thing, but so is a note, so is a call, so is a visit, so is maybe just a small gift. Maybe it's sitting with somebody at lunch that you wouldn't ordinarily. Do something for that person that you just thought of, that you raised a prayer for. And the next week, invariably, those students would come back and share, Mr. Neil, this is what I did. And to me, that experience allowed me to drive home from those classes every Wednesday night with an incredible, incredible sense of peace, knowing that there is good that is being done in the world by these young people. So I will close this discussion, this lunch and learn. Again, I hope you had a fabulous lunch. I will close this by saying I started into this activity knowing I wasn't qualified. Not a terribly holy person. I don't understand Scripture. I've had no experience with kids. Sometimes I struggle with things that the church itself teaches. Sometimes I disagree. I didn't think I was qualified. As a side note, if you volunteer for the Faith Formation program, you do not have to pay the fee for your own children to go. In reality, that works out to about 38 cents an hour for the activity that you put in. I describe myself as hesitant, but not quite reluctant to step into this role. It is a role, it is a gift, it is something for which I will be incredibly grateful. I thank those 15 years of young people. I thank Mary, I thank Father Joe for translating my original sign-up to say, yes, this is something I want to do. My friends, have a most peaceful day, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is for you. Thanks for listening.